Shalom, friends. It's a great honor to have my good friend with me today, studying the Torah with me, my friend Michael Red. Shalom, Michael.
Shalom, Rabbi. How are you, sir?
Great. It's great to see you. Great to have you with us, studying the Torah together.
Yes, sir. It's an honor to be a part. Always an honor to see you and be a part.
Yeah, we've known each other for a couple of years already, and it seems like our whole relationship is based on the Torah, based on the Bible, God's Word. So that's pretty awesome.
Yes, sir. From the time we've met, it's been about just having that be the core value of our relationship. And it's been a beautiful journey. I've learned so much from you over the last 2.5 years. And it's the truth. It's the truth. It's the truth. I've learned a lot from you.
So we met the first time in Poland on a trip to the Holocaust sites, some of those memorial sites. That was pretty powerful. And then the last time I saw you in person, at least, was here in Israel, where you are speaking at a major investor conference talking about sports technology. So, Michael, why don't you start off? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into the studying.
Yeah, to just rewind a little bit, that trip in Poland really impacted my life. And the first time that we were able to go to Israel and spend time with you and do the tour, it really impacted me in a really incredible way. Michael Red had played in the NBA for a number of years, 12 years. And before that, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, wind up going to The Ohio State University and wind up having a great college career. And then I decided to take a risk on myself to pursue my dream of being in the NBA, and then had an incredible journey that whole time through the NBA, and was able to experience and achieve some incredible heights. But that was never who I was. Who I was could be a part of any space, any sphere. So I never really identified myself as a basketball player. It's just what I did. And so that same drive is still in me today, post-retirement from the NBA and to other endeavors like technology, venture capital, business, high-structured finance, learning the nuances of those worlds as well, and having the same drive and passion to achieve and learn. So it's been an incredible 40 years, to say the least.
Yeah. Now, wow, you just said so many things that were just so fascinating. That you said that joining the NBA was a challenge. Did you say that it was like not something that you were, that you had to think twice about? I would imagine.
Oh. Well, I'll say this because the college experience was so great, and we had so much fun in college. Obviously, the friendships, the bonds with my teammates, the whole college experience. And so leaving school early wasn't really a popular thing back then. But I felt really impressed upon my heart to just pursue my dream and be entrepreneurial in a sense.
Mm-hmm. So then you said another thing that I was wondering about. You said that, being a basketball player was not who you were, right?
Right.
I mean, which is an amazing thing because obviously you must have been practicing for thousands of hours and years and years and years to get in, but it wasn't who you were?
Yeah, no, and it never was. It's a part of me, but it was never my identity. And for me, no matter what sport or what space or what direction I decided to go down, I believe God's hand was on me to do incredible things, whether it was sports or whether it being a doctor, whether it be engineer or whatever it may have been. I just felt like that whatever I was going to go into, I was going to give it my all, but not allow what I did to identify me. And I think a lot of people, Rabbi Tully, associate who they are compared to what they do. And for me, it was important never to be so attached to it. although I loved it, I gave my all to it, never to be attached to the point to where that is my identity.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, there's two other things that I wanted to touch on before we start studying. You grew up in a religious family, right?
Yes.
I mean, so your devotion to God was that always with you, or did you develop that? Tell us about your family that you grew up in.
Still developing that. Yeah, I grew up in a pastor's home, and just really ingrained in me really principles to live by for the rest of my life when it comes to the Bible and the Word and truth. And so, yeah, it's been a lifelong commitment to just studying and seeking, which led me to you a couple years ago and our friends in Israel. And but it's been a lifelong journey of just seeking and wanting to grow and mature, wanting to explore. I've always been curious about things. And so when it comes to truth, I still to this day stay curious about it.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. And now after the MBA, so you started, tell us about what you've been up to after the MBA. You've been involved with ministry and you've been involved with business in Israel. Let's hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, we launched a ministry in 2008 called The Wave. My wife and I were really ambitious about seeing people's lives change and touched. And so we launched in 2008, and that was a huge part of us just giving back while we even planned. But since then, retired in 2013. I was 32 years old, and you really can't retire at 32. You just transition into something else. And so for me, it was hard initially because it's something I did my whole life. But also at the same time, I was excited for the next chapter, next endeavor of our lives. So was always curious about technology, curious about business, began to surround myself with some really credible people in the venture world, and then became an investor, became an angel investor. And now I have my own company. It's called 22 Ventures. It's an acquisition entrepreneurship play where we are virtually getting companies that have been around forever, that are doing extremely well, but they just have dated marketing, dated branding, dated systems, and we want to bring those companies into the 21st century and grow them. But not only grow them, but also put entrepreneurs who have been kind of kicking the tires for many years and struggling as an entrepreneur, and allow those innovative, creative skill sets to be put into something that's established. And so give them opportunity to be able to be creative within something that's already having momentum in business. So that's that. So I got my hand in a little bit of everything, but it's the central focus of all of it is to help people and to uplift people and to platform people, whether it be through ministry, whether it be through business, is giving people an opportunity and access that they normally would have had.
And then finally, so you were speaking at a major conference for investors in Jerusalem not too long ago. So tell us about your connection to Israel and Israeli business world.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, life changed when we went to Poland to connect with you, and then obviously to Jerusalem. And there was such a love that was developed for the land. And then all of a sudden there became a love that developed for the people as well. And then obviously now for the Torah. So there was never an intention to really get into business per se, but just continue to learn. And we spent time with you on the tour and just wanted to learn and grow. And then things began to happen as far as the connections over in Jerusalem with our crowd, one of the top BCs in the region. And so got connected to some great people with that organization and that firm, which led to other things, which was having me speak this year at their conference and share about what's happening in sports tech and the evolution and the cross-pollination between athletes and technology. So that was a great, great, great humbling opportunity that happened. But all of it stems from just prayer, being at the wall, wanting to know more about God, studying his truth. And that's the core of everything. And then everything else is just icing on the cake as far as business and opportunities.
Well, you're so humble, and you've accomplished so much, but it's always about God, and that's what I love about you. Just before we really get into it, I know I keep saying that.
No, you're fine.
How has it been with your family living in Corona times and quarantine, self-isolation at home? How's that been going for you guys?
You know what? It's been challenging. It's been challenging. I know there's, other perspectives. I think it's been challenging for the world, whether it be big challenges or small challenges. They've been challenging. Positives are that we've been able to spend time together every day, all day together for the last 7 8 weeks. And that's been great of discovering each other, learning more about each other, having been around each other, being creative, creating positive moments during this time that the kids will never forget. But it's been a challenge because I need a hug, Rabbi Tuli. And so my kids hug me, my wife hugs me, but I love people. I love being around people. And so it's interesting how much we value now interaction with each other and hugs and kisses. And we took it we took it for granted that we had technology and social media and these different platforms to kind of connect through, but there's nothing like human touch and human hugs and human kisses and being around each other. So the communal aspect, although technology captures it, obviously we're talking through Zoom right now, but there's nothing like being in front of you and hugging you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Haven't really heard anybody say that, so I appreciate that perspective. I actually read an article about how, people are missing, there's something physical that happens in your brain and your body when, that you're interacting with other people. And so there's like a physical change that's happening to all of us, whether we realize it or not. But you obviously do realize it. Now,
I don't mean to cut you off. I'll say this, and you may laugh at this, but I think it's true. As long as we had as our foundation physical touch, technology and social media, these platforms were really, really cool. But now that technology is now preeminent, it's not as cool as much,
right.
And so I was on a Zoom call last week with some of our community and some friends of ours within the ministry. And I said to them, this is really getting annoying to me. And they laughed like, why is this being annoying to you? I said, because the more I see you, the more I want to be around you and hug you. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I think that probably a lot of people can relate to that. So thanks for sharing that. Now, I asked what you wanted to study, and you said that you wanted to talk about King David. So tell us about, King David obviously is like super famous. We all know about King David. He was so diverse. He was a poet who wrote the Psalms. He was a warrior who battled against the Philistines and beat Goliath. And he, was a righteous, holy individual, but at the same time, he stumbled and he sinned, and especially with Bathsheba. That's a famous story. He did so much. What about King David is fascinating to you, Michael?
A lot. You said a lot of it. It's interesting that Samuel gets the word from the Lord to go anoint a son from Jesse's house. And he goes, and Shammah, Eliab, Abinadab, all of them are like right there with the rest of the sons, positioning themselves to be the next king. And Jesse's really proud of those 7. And that other boy is in with the sheep hanging out, and he's not even in position himself to be king. And when Samuel sees him, that's the one, speaking of David, to anoint. And I'm sure the brothers were disgruntled, obviously, upset by that. Even to the point to where David, he begins to go feed them during the time of battle against Goliath, the Philistines, and they're still kind of bitter at him, even though he's bringing them food to serve them and things of that nature. And David never asked for the anointing or the oil, and he didn't know what he was signing up for either. At the same time, those next 15 years of his life, and I began to just study his life in between the oil and him being king. And I think those are years I haven't heard too much on as far as what he had to deal with and go through. And it was interesting, and I believe it's in Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 30, he begins to encourage himself. And then he begins to say, hey, shall I pursue? And God says to him, yeah, you should pursue and recover all. And the character of David has not been eclipsed by anybody in the scriptures. Out of all the characters, in the scriptures, his character is second to none. His ability to bounce back, his tenacity, his commitment to God is unparalleled. And I'm fascinated by his life and his commitment through all of the pain and loss that he had to deal with. This is a man that lost his best friend. He sees his king with his head cut off, and he loses his wives. He loses his reputation.
His son, the rebellion. Yeah.
The sons, but even before king, he loses his father's house. He loses his relationship with his brothers. He loses a city that it was given to him. There was a lot of loss in between the oil and being king. Mm-hmm. And basically what I'm taking from that is that when God really calls you or anoints you or marks you to do incredible things in the world, there is a process that you have to go through to get to the manifestation of that promise. And, I know in the Western culture, that's not always talked about. Some of the things that we have to go through to get to where we need to get to. And so when I glean from David's life, he was able to pretty much endure all that he was able to endure and still press on and say, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm going to pursue and I want to recover all. God gives him obviously the command to go recover all, but his bounce back, his tenacity, his grit in those 15 years of dealing with all of what he went through. I mean, a spear was thrown at him by Saul. He lost his heart. He lost his peace while he was with the sheep and creating all these great songs and psalms. It was something that he didn't sign up for. It's almost interesting how, you'll sometimes from God get the beginning of the process and the end of the process, but you never know about what happens in between in that journey. And I know I've experienced that in my life where there were some things that was promised to me. There's things that goals I had, but I didn't know what I had to get through to get to where I was wanting to go to. So I don't know if that makes sense, Rabbi Tuli. You can probably clean it up, but I'm fascinated by the years in between when he was anointed as a young child or a young teenager to when he actually became king.
So like his exile years, so to speak. Yeah. I remember like reading that the first time, and like it's a little unclear when you read it in the text that it sort of sounds like he's made king right away, and then you realize that he's not the king yet. He has to still earn it somehow. And I remember that like it threw me off because yeah. So now to me, when I think of King David, I don't know why. I guess probably because of where I'm sitting, being here in Israel. The first thing I really think about is Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
Jerusalem was that city that he established. He was from Judah, and so his territory was really Hebron, And that's really where his family was from, his people were from, the Bethlehem and Hebron area. And nevertheless, he made Jerusalem his capital. He went to Jerusalem. He and he wanted to obviously build a temple there as well, and to like establish it as he did establish it as his capital. He really wanted to establish it as the spiritual capital of the world with the building of the temple, which he was unable to do. Nevertheless, and that's a fascinating discussion in itself, but he's inextricably tied to Jerusalem. And so a lot of the challenges that you were describing that David had to live with can also be applied to some extent to the city of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. That Jerusalem was a city that was promised great things, had a very glorious past, and at the same time, the end is also described pretty clearly in the Bible, what's going to happen in Jerusalem in the end of days. And it's that middle period in between when Jerusalem is sort of made the capital, but then it sort of loses it. And that's the period that we're in right now. And then there's the promise in the end that there will be this glorious future for Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think it's practical in a sense where and you gave a great analogy about Jerusalem. It's like a microwave society that we live in. We want things right now, and it doesn't always work out like that. There's a process that you have to go through to really actually develop your character before you get to where you're meant to get to. And I've been through that in my life, Rabbi Thule, where I had to be processed. My character almost didn't match where I was heading, in a sense. And there were some things that I had to go through. It's interesting to me that David went through what he went through before he became king. And it's almost like sometimes when you get the goal or get the achievement without having gone through anything, the first time that you face struggle or a challenge while you're at the top or at the pinnacle, you would abandon what you've been able to achieve because you haven't gone through anything. So David went through what he went through from my perspective of the scriptures. And so when Absalom came and when he lost his baby and all the things that he went through, he was able still to endure his position because of what he went through on his way to getting the position, if that makes sense.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it reminded me a lot of also of the way that you were describing King David. It reminded me a lot about Moses, because Moses also is somebody who's like on the cusp of, he's always on the cusp of, he's leads the people into the promised land, but he doesn't quite make it. And he really wants to, in the same way that King David really wants to build a temple. It's all he wants is to dwell in the house of the Lord. He's unable to really do that. And so, I was thinking about how when Moses leads the people out from out of Egypt and into the wilderness, which is so reminiscent of the time period that we're in. We are just coming off the heels of Passover, and Passover, of course, we celebrate our bondage and our liberation from Egypt from bondage in Egypt, and we're headed towards the next festival is Shavuot, Pentecost, which is exactly, the Torah describes it as 49 days after Passover. It's not actually given a date. It says that it's going to be 49 days after Passover. That's when we are going to receive the Torah. That's the culmination of the Passover, in the sense that we got our physical freedom, our physical liberation, but not our spiritual liberation until we become servants to God and when we receive the Torah. And, so what happens to the Jewish people the minute we have adversity in the book of Exodus is that, Moses leaves for a couple of minutes, a couple of days, and all of a sudden they start worshiping the golden calf. They get distracted, like the microwave generation is not maybe even just a modern phenomenon. That was something that they were also looking for, instant gratification on a spiritual plane. But we see that they had to develop further. And that period that we're in, actually, this is something that I spoke about with Danny, Pastor Danny Ortiz, the other day on our podcast, was that the period from Passover to Shavuot to Pentecost is a period of spiritual growth. We're not ready to receive the Torah until we prepare ourselves spiritually for those 49 days. That we had a slave mentality, which we had to lose. We had to cut that, and and so when you're not really faced with that adversity, you can lose it all so quickly.
100%. I've experienced it in my own life of going through a process, going through the wilderness of life to prepare you to be a good steward of what God gives you. And so when I look at that situation with Moses and the children of Israel, and then you look at David and his journey, they do parallel. And I have such admiration for both Moses and David, but I've just been recently studying the life of David and just really glean a lot from his life. And it's funny because, again, when you're marked to change the world and have an impact or influence society and culture, we're not necessarily told everything that happens in between the journey. In fact, if we were told everything that we would have to go through, I don't know if a lot of us would have signed up for, the journey. So a lot of heartache I've gone through in my life over the years, a lot of challenges that I've gone through in my life. I could not have seen those things, but it pushed me and it drove me to where I am now.
Yeah. The last thing that, when I was thinking about David, I was preparing for this, for our talk. Mm-hmm. And, the very end of the book of Samuel 2 is really not only interesting, but super relevant for the time that we're living in, because he's approached by a prophet, God, the prophet. And this is in chapter 24. It says, verse 11, when David rose in the morning, the word of God had come to the prophet God, G-A-D, David's prophet, David's seer. And he says, go and tell David. And he said that I'm going to give you a choice. You have to choose between a famine, a 7-year famine, or adversaries or pestilence. And so basically, God ends up sending a plague, right, onto David's kingdom at that point. So in verse 15, David appeals to God's mercy and compassion. But in verse 15, God sends pestilence upon Israel from the morning until the evening. 70,000 of the people died from Dan to Beersheba. There was a huge plague in the land at that time. 70,000 people died. It's a lot of people. I mean, that's a ton of people. So what is it's amazing how, so David, speaking to the angel, and this is obviously like kind of like a mystical section here in the book of Samuel, which is ordinarily like a pretty cut and dry kind of story. King David is talking to an angel, and finally he doesn't know what to do, right? And the people are being punished, and David says, don't punish the people, punish me, right? And so God tells him, here's what you need to do. You need to basically set up an altar and buy a very specific piece of land, and David does that, and that land is Jerusalem. That land is the Temple Mount, exactly that Temple Mount. David purchases it at this point, and it says that he's offered it for free. He doesn't want to take it for free, and he buys it for 50 shekel of silver. He buys it for 50 shekel. And then it's amazing. The last verse in Book of Samuel 2, chapter 24, verse 25. David built there an altar to God, to Hashem, sacrificed burnt offerings and offerings of well-being. And God responded to the plea for the land, and the plague against Israel stopped. I mean, it's kind of gives you the chills right now, as we in America, I think, is like approaching, 70,000 deaths
Yeah.
close to it.
Um,
And, and the leader, instead of the leader immediately of the people, he took full responsibility.
yeah.
He didn't put the blame anywhere else. He took the responsibility on his own shoulders. Don't punish the people, punish me. What can I do? And God says that you need to recommit yourself to Jerusalem, to sacrifice, to coming close to God. And when he does that, when he builds that altar and when he sacrifices to God, then immediately the plague stops.
Yeah. 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 Wow. Wow. There's a lot in that. How do you see this practically for today? Do you see the same patterns developing, or we should take the same pattern, even as our government leaders, us as leaders in our communities? Do you see the same path that we need to take?
I think that, also in the Torah portion that we were reading last week, it also talks about the leprosy condition on the body. And there again, it's very clear that's not a physical ailment, even though it sounds like a disease and it sounds like almost a contagious disease. That's why the person had to go into isolation for 7 days. And like the virus that we're all dealing with, we have to be in isolation because it's so contagious.
Yeah.
But it's obviously, when the Bible talks about disease and plagues, it's not physical, it's spiritual. The lessons that we need to take are spiritual. And so, of course, you as a Christian and me as a Jew, when both of us are looking at the situation that the world is in right now, and we're looking into the Bible for wisdom and for instruction, we're looking for spiritual messages.
Yeah.
And it's not so complicated because the message is always the same.
Right.
And the message is the message of King David, always trying to come close to God, no matter what the adversary, the enemy was putting in front of him, no matter what the challenge with his family or with the physical enemies, or it was all the answer, the solution was always the same: coming close to God.
No matter, you're 100% correct. And this is a great time to draw closer to the Lord and to God. And I feel like you're right. You said it, David, even when he lost his child with Bathsheba and that whole story, he was never concerned. And that's the difference between him and Saul, in a sense. Saul wanted to look right in front of the people and cover up for what he did not do with killing King Agag alive and that whole story. What David did was much more egregious than what Saul did, actually, with adultery, with the murder of her husband. All Saul did was save someone's life, actually.
Yeah.
But David, in the midst of that, says, you can take everything away from me. You can take my kingship, you can take the ring, you can take the robes, you can take the courtsmen, you can take all of this away, but don't take your presence from me.
Mm.
To your point about drawing, no matter what I go through, don't take your presence, don't take that devotion, that commitment to God. Please, God, don't take that away from me. You can have everything else, but don't take my devotion time with you. That was developed when he was a teenager. That one-on-one communion that he had with God when he was even taking care of the sheep and whatnot.
That devotion to God stuck with him his entire life. And some of the greatest passages that we know from King David are all about that devotion to God. When he's walking through the valley of the shadow of death, he fears no evil because God is with me. And there's another one that he says that, I alluded to it earlier, but he says that, I'll say it in Hebrew, Achad sha'alti me'et Hashem, that the one thing that I request of God is that I will dwell in the house of the Lord all my days. And so many other passages as well are just focused on his desire, his one desire, his exclusive desire to get close to God. And, you talked about how it's difficult to be in isolation. It's challenging to be apart from other people, and it for sure is. But I mean, I don't have to tell you, and I don't have to tell everybody who's listening to this, that we know that God is always with us, no matter what. God is always with us, whether or not, you know, we're able to interact with anybody else, and or if we're in solitary confinement, you know, or confinement with our families, whatever it is, we are always with God. God is always with us. And especially now when all of the other interactions have been limited. So it's really an opportunity to come closer to God. And,
Yes,
and it seems like that's the way out of this as well.
I agree. As you know, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it talks about there's a time for this and a time for that, a time for this, a time for that. And in verse 11, it says that God makes everything beautiful in its time. And that word beautiful, I believe, means appropriate. And this is really, although everything around us seems to be dark and chaotic right now, this is still an appropriate time. Why? Because God is still trustworthy. He is still trustworthy in the midst of all of what we're going through right now with the pain, anxiety, depression all around the world, heartache, death all around us. It's still an appropriate, beautiful time. Why? Because he is still God. He's still the I am. He is still trustworthy no matter what we deal with. And that is our anchor. I know for us, it's our anchor, and I believe it's the anchor for the world.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much. That was really, it's always great to speak with you. Very inspiring. And I know I'll be repeating this to my wife when I get home soon. So thank you for making the time.
Oh, thank you for having me, Rabbi Tully. We've had incredible conversations over the last 2.5 years, so we were able to put it on the screen and record it this time. So thank you.
And just to conclude, you know, I just wanted to express my appreciation, my gratitude, because these Zoom classes are a project of the Yeshiva for the Nations, and that was really an initiative that a good friend of ours, Donna, made happen. But then you and Pastor Danny jumped in just at the right moment and breathed a new vitality into the Yeshiva for the Nations. And so hopefully all the people who are benefiting from these Zoom classes are benefiting from your investment in the Yeshiva, your partnership in the Yeshiva. So just thank you for that as well.
No, it's my honor. It's because your vision and your heart for the teachings to get out there is what we really bought into. So thank you, sir. And shout out to Donna. We love her. And shout out to my brother, Danny Ortiz.
All right. Well, bye, everybody. Shalom from Israel.
Shalom.